Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. This has been a very nice evening with you guys. Since Friday, the activity of the organization has been incredible. I don't know if you had the opportunity to be in the Mervilla. It's incredible. Their work is something that should be appreciated. So I'm very thankful for being invited, both as a chair of this last session of today's second day, and to be in the scientific committee. Thank you so much, to Manuel especially. I think that we only going to have 2 presentations because Viviane didn't answer the call, so I don't know if she's here. We will start. With well, this panel has to do with post-urban crisis. We will start with ZEYNEP DOİSAN from the Istanbul Şehir University Institute of Social Sciences. She's going to present a paper on Socio-Spatial study on Istanbul. Okay, go ahead. 15 minutes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay. First of all, I want to thank the organization for giving me the opportunity to present my research here. I'm a graduate student of Istanbul Şehir University, Sociology Department. Today I will share a part of my research I have done in the last year for my master thesis. The research was conducted on a UNESCO Cultural Heritage Site of Istanbul, a neighborhood next to the historic land walls of the city, which is called Mevlanakapı, face a daily conflict with the municipality's ongoing transformation projects. I tried to understand this conflict on a discourse level, to understand how everyday experiences and meaning-giving mechanisms of different agents get into conflict. Here is the area of this neighborhood, and the land goes from Haliç to Marmara Sea, following this line. The land walls of Istanbul, which were built by the Byzantine emperor in the 5th century, are a unique example of city's cultural heritage. The huge building surrounding the historic city center, settled between Golden Horn and Marmara Sea, lost its function as a fortification wall now, but it turned into a rich cultural landscape. This landscape contains elements of an urban culture with a multi-layered history found in everyday life. Everyday life around the walls is inseparable from the physical existence of the wall, which is the major determinant of the area. The wall complex is a unique architecture constituted of a binary wall system with a moat outside of it. It functions as an obstructing and enabling condition for the inhabitants living there, who have to cross the walls each day through the gates. While the walled area preserved its role as a city center border until the second half of the 20th century, with the expansion of the city between 1950 and 1970, the area turned into an industrial center and faced a population growth. So the land wall complex turned into a neglected area with illegal workplaces using towers and spaces between the walls. In the 1970s, it was a scene of urban poverty and dirt. This area functions as a shelter for excluded commercial activities and immigrants till 1990s, and it turned into an image of insecurity of the city in the collective memory of people living in Istanbul. The walls and their surroundings, with an inner and outer conversation zone, were added into the World Heritage List of UNESCO in 1985. Several restoration plans on the walls followed this legal status that was implemented in the 1990s. Turning the site into a touristic attraction was also enabled by moving all the small factories also outside the wall. Because of the high population and tense urban structuring inside the walls, the transformation on this site was enabled with legal changes. 2000s became an urban transformation period for cities of Turkey and for Istanbul as well. It was realized according to neoliberal urbanism principles. At that time, implication of the projects led to displacement and replacement of significant numbers of people, the relocation of poverty, and dramatic changes in the landscape of the city. With a legal regulation in 2005, local municipalities became responsible for urban renewal projects in the historic city center, and they bypassed the former control mechanisms like urban conservation boards. Afterwards, several urban transformation projects were declared and enforced in the land wall area. Fatih municipality, which is the district municipality responsible for the inner area of the land walls, has implemented 3 renewal projects following the law. I will talk about Ayvansaray project, Sulukule, and by a housing project in the so-called traditional Ottoman style. The second one, implemented on the northern side of the land walls, next to the Golden Horn in Ayvansaray. There, a project called Turkish Neighborhood was implemented by displacing the locals, renovating their old houses, and building of a hotel by an international company. The last one was a recreational park project along the wall in the conservation zone. The park project was rejected after protests of several activist groups. However, the historic city garden, we call them Bostan, inside the Theodosian walls was already demolished. All of these 3 projects were implemented on the cultural heritage site, while there was an effort to open the area to the newcomers, tourists, or richer inhabitants. For expropriation policies. Against those arguments, local inhabitants of these neighborhoods use their local knowledge, their biographies, and family histories to defend their right to keep living there. Underneath those projects lay the conflicting discourses. If the walls represent Byzantine heritage or the Ottoman conquest of the city. This conflict turned into a clash of historiographies of the land walls between the authorities. In contrast to that, social memory of the neighborhood's everyday life include heterogeneous aspects that are not included in grand narratives of the land walls. This memory has a manipulative power against the historiography of the land walls and an empowering aspect for the settlers, which enables them to stand in a group against upcoming threats from the municipality. Mevlanakapı neighborhood has gone through a similar process because of the urban changes in the area. It is one of the historical neighborhoods on the eastern side of the land walls. In the last 2 years, the settlers of neighborhood have been facing an ongoing threat from the municipality, which was trying to construct a park on the inner side of the land wall. This means widening the road and demolishing 3 building blocks next to it, which will affect it is important to understand the settlers' position in the ongoing debate. I argue that to have an efficient sociological understanding of the neighborhood, we need to have a perspective considering the historical, social, and physical conditions of the area. While the municipality constructed its arguments on the history with a focus on the Ottoman period, I ask, what is the role of the inhabitants in this historiography? What kind of meaning do they attribute to the walls? On the other hand, what is the role of assumed security problem in their everyday life? To seek answers for these questions, it is necessary to conceptualize a research on social memory of the neighborhood with a focus on the physical conditions. As a methodology of the research, I conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with people in different social levels. All of the participants were reached through the networks of 2 community centers, opened and financed by the inhabitants. The first one is the Inner Wall Neighborhoods Association, opened by the under threat inhabitants of Mevlanakapı. The other one, which I will refer to as the community center, was opened by the former headman of the neighborhood and his friends. This part of the neighborhood does to see the differences between 2 centers according to their conditions. Interview questions were based on the shared memories on physical size of the walls. In analysis, I conducted a narrative analysis by following specific concepts that are important in contemporary debates, like security and history. I approaching this issue through the method of social memory, which defines memory as a sense-making process, the meaning of the past in relation to present. Halfbass, the founder of this perspective, argues that while personal memory is achieved in relation to society, collective memory is recognized, recalled, and reconstructed in society. Remembering is only possible in a societal relation. However, there are also group-based memories in one single society. I take Osman's conceptualization, social memory, as a memory of small groups based on shared social experience and builds up a group identity. Social memory has a bottom-up and heterogeneous structure. In this research, I also take Özürek's critique in public memory. Even in a group, people do not have to agree on memories. Different members of a group can have various narratives which can be changed according to their relation with the present. During my research, all of the participants emphasized their gratitude with the neighborhood. They said they are proud and happy to live there. It seemed that their feeling of belonging to the area is really high, which refers to a group identity they shared. Besides socializing together, they kept remembering together by talking about own memories. In the community center, it was a daily routine to talk about old days, memories, and old friends. Besides, for settlers under threat, remembering the past was easily connected to the possibility of losing it. A female participant from the association mentioned her memories as a part of the house they lived in. Her way of expressing the will to stay at the neighborhood was also connected to her effort not to lose her home, which was the place of her memories. This kind of combination of places and small groups could be seen in most of the narratives. Home and neighborhood, family and neighbors are always mentioned together. Connerton adds a special dimension and emphasizes site-specific remembering in a contrast between Before the restoration of the walls, they were part of daily life, as if one of the streets or centers of the neighborhood. Participants remembered the walls, especially in their childhood memories, as a green area of picnic with its flowers and trees. The different experience of female and male participants could be seen in the narratives about security. Most of them were making a distinction between the walls at night and walls in the morning. We see that they put a distinction also between inside and outside of the wall by seeing it as a border of security. Besides localizing the fear and insecurity to specific places of the walls and to specific people like strangers, we could also see that a period of time could be referred as insecure. The streets of the area where the municipality planned to build a park became a marketplace for a drug gang very recently. It seems that the gang used the walled area for the sale and the walls as a place to hide and pass without being seen from the police forces. It prevented settlers from using some streets and even reaching of some services to the houses. Throughout these security problems, settlers thought that they did to call, they could also harm their children. This process seemed ended with the involvement of the narcotic police. When we think about the relation of history and memory and their conflict, we should also remember Nora's conceptualization, lieu de mémoire, which is embodiment of memory in certain sites, where a sense of historical continuity persists. These sites could be physical places or rituals that trigger a group feeling. Commemoration of the land walls based on the Ottoman heritage by referring to the conquest of Istanbul can be given as an example to this. The ceremony of the conquest is recurring every year with the reconquest of the walls with costume soldiers. This ceremony was invented as a nationalization of the walls to put the Byzantine past aside and to emphasize the Turkish Muslim identity of the city. This ceremony was also narrated as an important memory of the settlers in which they participated with their families. But also there were civil ceremonies, civic rituals showing the heterogeneity of the neighborhood. A female settler mentioned Hıdrellez, which is a celebration of the beginning of the summer, and it is based on a culture intertwined of Christianity, Islam, and regional traditions. As Nora said, selecting some elements of the past and localizing them to the sites leads to forgetting of the other traditions that are not compatible with that. This female inhabitant was the only one who remembered that festival celebration around the walls. Also, despite the effort to delay the Byzantine heritage, this heritage is a part of Mevlanakapı's everyday life. They mention found tombs because the area around the walls was used as a necropolis by Byzantine. Tombs could be found there. It seemed that the settlers were also aware of the procedure on the conservation of the historical artifacts. They were seeing it as a part of history to be protected and taking care of the cultural heritage. On this photograph, you can see a This event was remembered in the meetings of the association. Although the settlers did not bother when the police station was used as a workshop and turned into an abandoned building afterwards, the attempt to abolish it recalled their memory about its importance. This could be seen as a reaction to the gentrification because locals were tired of seeing a change each day of feeling under the threat of expropriation. The municipality's attempt to demolish the police station also shows that despite its historical value, if a building does not free from experience and conflict, Benjamin proposes the usage of the memory. Memory has a potential to create its own state of emergency, its own calendar, and makes a leap from past to present or vice versa. If the administrative power can make those leaps in the time by choosing a figure, a theme, then people can also do the same. The reaction against the demolition of the Ottoman police station is a way of using memory against those politics. Insignificant relations to a place can be recalled in times of conflict and turned into a potential to come together. The same relation between past and present, we can remember the phrase, past is a position. Past does not exist independently from the present. We create the past according to present. Also, we became end results of this continuous creation of the past. In conflict between two sides of the land walls, we see this relation between historical narratives and people's reaction to this. In this sense, land walls could be seen as a threshold connecting history and memory. On the thresholds, the power decides what is representable, says Turkish sociologist Meltem Ahiska. Maybe for a discussion between past and present and history and memory, we should also look at the threshold where the both have their traces. While the diversity of the memories of the city is under threat of an urban transformation process, we can see the empowering aspect of the memory by looking at those thresholds. Thank you very much.
I think it was very innovative, your perspective, because sometimes we see urban history and urban memory as being commodified and privatized, right, as a consumption product, and you show us how memory can be an instrument of resistance. It's very interesting. Thank you so much. Now, Varvara, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, can you hear us? Okay. We're going to have Varvara KSIROPITA. Is that right?
Yes.
She comes from the School of Architecture from the National Technical University of Athens, and she's going to speak to us on the postmodern city in crisis. Welcome, Varvara. Go ahead, 50 minutes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have me via Skype and the opportunity to present my work. I'm a PhD candidate in the University of Technical Research of Athens, at the School of Architecture. My PhD is on Ferguson in Black Lives Matter.
Your connection is quite bad.
What?
Your connection is not the best, so I will ask you just to speak a little bit lower.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now it's better?
Much better.
Now? Better now?
Yes.
Okay. I like my work on Stavros Stamatis' work on the city of place and the city of thresholds, and the content sits agenda. My paper focus on Ferguson Uprising that took place in August of 2014 after the murder of Michael Brown, a black and Arab teenager, by a police officer. The research focuses on the uprising moment and seeks to depict and conceptualize the dynamic connection between place and space in terms of representations, practices, symbolisms, and transformations occurred during the contentious moment of the uprising. The focus on the dialectic relationship between the city of enclaves and the city of thresholds attempts to highlight the spatial temporal quality of threshold experience as a counterexample to the dominant enclave city. Regarding to the city of enclaves, is about an amalgam of spaces where simultaneously chaos and order alternate each other. And then, meanwhile, the main characteristics are the identity. The city of enclaves is simultaneously the cause and the result of a neoliberal function of governing, targeting and resulting to a disorganized urban party. The bone of the conflict is the implementation of a manageable access in a definite territory rather than all-embracing government. There is no homogeneous sense of law, nevertheless, local rules and protocols of use, and the users of urban space adapt or resign of their social and political rights. Invisibility between the state and the excluded communities. In these occasions, the state advances to turbulent actions in the name of a state of exception. The ghettos are a dominant example of hostile and unpredictable urban space for the state, and the multifarious peril of such enclosed communities must be controlled in order to prevent its contagion practices of habitation. Social discriminative forms and typologies. It is easily understood that behind that chaotic kaleidoscope of experiences and practices, there is a tightly planned structure of the urban environment, followed by specific patterns of behavior in the city. Nevertheless, within these semblances of enclosure, new forms of resistance are emerging, and they are strongly connected to emancipatory contentious collective actions. Crucial form of contentious politics consists whereas contentious politics research agenda focus on the critical and ongoing contention between the grassroots movements and the oppressive state apparatus. Furthermore, politics is about a contentious condition which aims to institutional transformations, whilst social movements concern assertive collective actions reflecting networks of concrete ideas, social and cultural values, and frame political discourse and actions in a continuous interaction with the established institutional environment. Spatiality promotes the concept of a space that contains and is being contained by the society. This is precisely why space is fundamentally political space. This assumption manifests that the production of a space would take place during the emergence of the urban conflicts, exerts transformative qualities over the contentious collective actions and vice versa. Meanwhile, the nexus between society, contentious collective actions, and urban space reveals say to their history and produce their material, relational, symbolic, and lived space. Ferguson Uprising synthesizes all those components that reveal the occurring crisis in the city of enclaves. Ferguson is an inner ring suburb located in the county of St. Louis, Missouri. In August 9, 2014, an armed black teenager, Michael Brown, was shot and killed by white police officer Darren Wilson. Brown's dead body was lying in the middle of Canfield Drive for more than 4 hours, a despicable fact that drew public outrage. Images and videos of the murder on Twitter and Facebook, spreading the news nationwide. The story of the murder soon revived the enduring issue of racial inequality and the violent tactics police used to treat with the black community. The murder of Michael Brown ignited massive protests, whereas police answered with violence, imposed a curfew, used tear gases, and prevented the protesters from staying in one location. The protesters took to the streets for more than a year, and that was a very critical moment for the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Activists stood for some crucial being queer, transgender affirming, and unapologetically black. The murder of Michael Brown revealed the complex of several urban and suburban ills, such as constant racial and economic segregation, the racial exclusion from social services, police brutality and violence, and the extremely limited civil rights of black Americans. The dramatic growth of the inequalities over the years has also unveiled the aggregated results of long-lasting period of austerity. Neoliberal governing policies implemented by a fragmented local government as of Ferguson's simply uncovers the outcome of a fragmentized urban landscape. To specify, by 2010, hundreds of unincorporated municipalities and 18 counties in 2 states have been made. That metropolitan and jurisdictional fragmentation is simultaneously about an artifact and a mechanism of racial segregation. Ghetto communities, usually overpopulated without resources, are inhabited by marginalized and excluded social groups. Gated communities are connected with the history of the oppressive policies the state implemented to black Americans since the era of slavery. Evidently, via practices such as apparatus of the subjugation of black communities. There is a strong nexus among the social construction of the built environment and the social construction of racial identities. In fact, the ideological operation through which the construction of racial identities and the construction of the built environment are and have been intertwined. The making of suburbs such as Ferguson aimed to the interruption of public space, long-distance infrastructures such as the development of highways, actually aimed at the prevention of free. The pathology of suburban construction is connected with the fragmentation of the metropolitan landscape, the flow of space, and the patchwork fashion in which the city is transformed historically. It's about a pervasive incarceration complex which extended beyond prisons to the urban environment, focusing in the main on the concepts of self-surveillance and fear. idealizing self-policing society as the very image of the future city of control. Some fundamental facts in regard with the uprising. Ferguson constituted a watershed because a new generation of African Americans decided to take the history of the civil rights movement forward, a moment that transformed to a movement. Ferguson Uprising evolved to a diverse, imaginative, and inventive reclaim of public space. Ferguson, as the extension of a patchwork metropolis, became the salient stake of the conflict. As a matter of fact, Ferguson, from a stronghold of historical racial segregation, became a porous space where new forms of encounters emerged. The protagonists produced new forms of encountering via collective actions, such as the occupation of the streets of the municipality, and they transformed the space as a web of collective memory, shared the common claims about justice and racial equality. Furthermore, managed to articulate a discourse against the given spatial ordering by producing of neighborhood meeting areas where the community organized actions and cultural events, such as the occupation of the Opera House in St. Louis, where a group of activists, paraphrasing the well-known chorus of the song "Which Side Are You?" said, "Which side are you, unfriends? Which side are you all? Justice for mighty brown friends, justice for us all." The obstruction of the normative function of the city, the activists succeeded, putting in risk their own lives with a new form of perform and practice space, a critical action that fundamentally affects the outcome of the form of the conflict. Those emergent spatialities they fight for. The uprising succeeded to escape the segregating characteristics and spread those actions and its contentious message all over the country. From the sites of the local police department to the interception of the traffic and from the organized memorials to the international solidarity campaigns, actions in Ferguson were unexpected, multifarious, and unforeseeable. Michael's Brown death reflected the vulnerability the black inhabitants of Ferguson suffered from years. Undoubtedly, youth and women were the protagonists of the uprising. Importance to be inclusive because racial division in the country reinforces gender inequalities too. This umbrella of oppressive non-identities was challenged to the core during the Ferguson Uprising. As Holloway pointed out, emancipation effectively is not to emancipate an oppressed identity, but rather an oppressed non-identity. Marginalized participants had the opportunity to express themselves in a way that is not compatible to and urban growth. City of thresholds might be the counterexample of the city of enclaves, the city that agglomerates identifying enclaves. Uprising inhabitants.
VARVARA, you have 3 minutes, okay?
Yes, thank you. Function as a temporary urban workshop, a spatio-temporal catalytic experience that gave birth to a movement. Activist efforts united under the common The paramount point of the uprising was the porous space emerged, highlighted not only a means of reclaiming space, but a new opportunity for the Black community to develop techniques of psychological healing and a means of free market aesthetic expression in regards with architecture theory and practice, the education and the everyday practices. The Ferguson Uprising became one more testimony of the way the Black community struggled to occupy the sense of the community living. Very much for your attention.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, it's curious to see both presentations. We talked about resistance, but especially how neoliberal rationale, you know, especially the one that comes from the late financialization capitalism, has the same common effects in every major cities or metropolitan areas of the world. But it has the same effects, the same consequences, the manifestations are very alike, but then what we see is that it deals and takes advantage of the historical and geographic to promote them in light of privatization, commodification, and these changes, I think, have been reinforced, especially during the period of austerity that came after the post-capitalist crisis of 2008 and 2009. As Jamie Peck says, I think that we are seeing a kind of austerity urbanism developing. So I opened the debate to the audience. I don't know if it's kind of late. I don't know if there's any questions to put to our present. Okay, 2 questions. Please identify.
So thank you for both presentations. I would like to ask ZEYNEP about Istanbul. To make it clear, and because I'm thinking while I'm talking, I'll mention an example. I originally come from Greece, and I was recently there in a guided tour, but for locals, and we're going through the old churches of Athens, and the guide was saying how many churches there are which got destroyed when Greece became an independent state, because the new state wanted to get rid of the Byzantine and Ottoman past and wanted to base the new Greek identity on the ancient image of what is Greek. Greek is the one who has received Greek education. So I saw a bit a similar pattern in Turkey, that you have monuments which have very diverse identities themselves and which have been animated by very different communities. But then there is this very weird mix where neoliberalism flows into identity politics and takes over and says this is our heritage and we can do whatever we want with it. And then in this long history that the site has, actually you isolate a very precise period and you say this was it, and no one else has the right to claim this site. Heritage, that the moment you do it, then actually you freeze this monument in time and you make it into a museum object. It's not a living site anymore. So I'm wondering, how do you see that you can have resistance in those conditions where neoliberalism, identity politics and gentrification flow into those memory and the production, everyday production of memory, as you say?
From Lund, Sweden, and my question is about the memory itself. So it's specifically to ZEYNEP, but it's feel free to VARVARA to respond as well, since you mentioned as well about on the memory. But my specific question is on when you use social memory, and then in your case, you explore the experience of memory from within the inhabitant of the city. But I'm wondering whether your study also considering the other part of memory. In studying memory, especially memory studies in the city, we always have to have this considering of the politics of memory, which is considering the remembering process, while at the same time also the forgetting part. So from your case or from your study, whether there is a strong sense as well of which part of cultural heritage that they are forgotten, and then whether there would be a contested idea between the forgotten part from the inhabitant vis-a-vis the city or the national narrative. And then it would be interesting to see. And then thanks again for sharing your interesting research. But I'm wondering which part of the forgotten part that it's being considered from both sides, inhabitant as well as the city. Because when we study memory, the remembering always comes all together with the forgetting part. Thank you.
Any more questions? No? Let's say no. Yes, you can answer.
I can. I heard about your comment, but I can't remember the question part.
It's how you can have an effective resistance at the moment when neoliberal policies use identity politics to promote only one memory and one culture on a site.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. I think, yeah, we can discuss it in a more but about selecting the identity, we know that it started with the each period of Turkish Republic. I mean, the selecting identity started with Turkish Republic and how they interpret the landfall area, and it also turned into Turkification process in 1950s. And at that time, it was part of an identity politics of the state, and we could not talk about neoliberal politics. And at that time, also Istanbul was not that much wealthy. I mean, to invest or to open it to world market. But we talk about this neoliberalism process in urban sphere in Turkey in 2000s, and it worked in Istanbul especially as a kind of a combination of neo-Ottoman identity and commodification of this identity in the city. Besides lots of modern projects, city, in this period, they redefined the Ottoman identity to commodify, especially in historic city center. All these projects were in, which I mentioned, renewable projects, were implemented in historic city center, and they found a way to use this traditional identity of this part to commodify. And in this sense, I mean, these neighborhoods also resisted to these politics. I mean, in each of them, there was a long resistance process, which were failed during the long legal process, because of this long legal process. And at that time, everyone was talking about their ancestors living in these neighborhoods, because even in Sulukule, for example, where the Roma people were living, the state claimed that they are illegal, but they have to refer to their family histories by claiming their right to stay there. They were saying, I'm living here for 3 centuries. I mean, and you cannot get rid of these people directly by opening it. And I think that memory in this sense could be part of this resistance. People use it, although they don't refer it as a memory, but they are aware of losing a house doesn't mean only losing a commodity, but losing a memory, a family history there. And although it's not used as a resistance motto in those neighborhoods, in in-depth interviews you can understand the emotional attachment people have on those neighborhoods. That's why it has an empowering, I mean, emotional empowering and producing a group identity in those neighborhoods. That's why it was a good, maybe, tool for resistance in those neighborhoods. Okay. About it's not about only history. I mean, the municipality and all the cultural investments on these sites are also using memory, of course. That's why I referred to conquest ceremony, which was held each year. I mean, you can also see that, as I mentioned, it was part of a Turkification process of the land was. I mean, to make it commemorating by the entering of the Turks to the city. And we see that people living there also, they can also feel an emotional relation with this commemoration, this ceremony itself. I mean, in last years, it was cancelled 4 years ago. I mean, we don't have this commemoration ceremony anymore. But people also feel that this ceremony should come back to the land walls because it's part of its identity. You can see that people also accept this part of commemoration by the state. I mean, they can feel, I mean, they explain how when they were a child, they attended these ceremonies. They can feel it. I mean, it is common for these people to commemorate the land wars with this conquest. But on the other hand, yeah, when you talk with the people, you can also find these other heterogeneous aspects of the neighborhood. They don't name it, or they don't categorize these like how the state do this. But you can also have this perspective by talking to people. Also about the forgetting part, I also think that forgetting can be part of the identity of the inhabitants. I mean, for example, because the area was a necropolis in Byzantine time, I mean, they can find tombs, but there were also some martyr sites which people call like saints of the city. I mean, you can find their tombstones in the neighborhoods, but you don't know about the identity of it. Probably they were Byzantine saints buried there, but now they are commemorated as Muslim saints. But this kind of forgetting the identity of these tombs also enabled a heterogeneity on the inhabitants' side, I think. And it also gives us a perspective to see how the forgetting mechanisms works in both sides. On the inhabitant side, it can work as a heterogeneity, giving the neighborhood or making them to remember or forget everything in various ways. But on the state side, when they use memory, forgetting can also go hand in hand with a top-down ideology.
Your mic is off. We can't hear you.
Now you can hear me?
Yes, but very low.
It's better now? It's better now?
O nosso som está na mesma, nós não mexemos.
Can you hear me now? I'm happy to add something. And speak about memory since there is some connection memories and the dominant theology. And I think that urban conflicts may activate getting memories. And so getting memories may be heard by counter practices of perform and produce memories. This is my ad here.
Okay, Varvara. Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, we have to finish since we have a 10-minute delay as usual. Next, we'll have working groups on hands-on work. We're going to have, through the coordination of Manuel, we're going to have Rita Cachado, Patrícia Pereira, Coletivo Leo, Jordi Noff, also Manuel and Henrique Chaves. Okay? See you in a bit.